be a pretty oversubscribed, which means that the demand for those that wanted to get in can get in on the secondary market once a company goes public. They were selling about $1 billion of a total $7 billion, and it was 25x oversubscribed. So Circle is the issuer behind the USDC stablecoin. And we've been talking about how Genius Act is coming soon. It passed in Congress, and now it moves over to Senate. And stablecoins are looking to be one of the solutions to how to roll over the debt bomb, the debt cycle that America has found itself in, and at the higher rate, so that those stablecoin issuers get significantly more yield so that they can earn more Bitcoin as well. So it's set to be an interesting, and people are paid many times over. In the initial public offering, and it went live yesterday, the stock rose approximately 160% after the initial IPO. So congratulations to all investors. And we'll see where the share price ends up, but it's approximately $100 for the Circle public offering. This was the third one that I've had where I was a private investor and it's gone public. The first one was Coinbase, then Robinhood, now Circle. And we also actually, the fourth one was Exodus. So there are more and more companies that our industry is becoming more and more institutionalized, as it were, and people are able to get exposure to the growth of this sector. Now, the one competing with Circle, the largest stablecoin in the industry, is Tether as well. And Tether has made an investment in another public company. It sent approximately $3.8 billion of Bitcoin in order to seed its investment in 21 Capital. 21 Capital is a Bitcoin holding company, and I've been sharing how it is connected to deep state actors. And I'm going to go through some of these public companies and some of these updates, but I don't believe that anybody should be messing around with this junk, quite frankly. It is for a particular type of investor, and it brings more and more buying volume to Bitcoin. But if you've watched any of my previous episodes, I break them up as well if you want to go to it and you missed it. Around one of them was the banks want your Bitcoin. And so I believe that we are setting ourselves up for something that we saw in 2022, but this time at the institutional level. You can go back to that video if you would like to learn more about this whole complex that's being set up to trick you out of your Bitcoin. And while I'm not making accusations at any one actor, 21 Capital is connected to some pretty deep state players like Cantor Fitzgerald, who is a discount broker who's also doing Bitcoin-backed loans. SoftBank, who's able to pull out capital from the Bank of Japan in the Japan carry trade. Cantor Fitzgerald pull out money via the Federal Reserve auctions, and also Tether itself with Jack Mallers as the front person as well. So there was a bunch of announcements around 21 Capital this week. One of them is they decided to, after Bitcoin 2025, when Michael Saylor got so much crap for saying that he won't publish the wallet addresses for MicroStrategy because he'd like to rely upon traditional auditors. Well, 21 Capital decided with Tether to publish their wallet addresses. So you can now see the 5 different wallet addresses to demonstrate that they have the Bitcoin that they say they have. You can see the 42,000 Bitcoin come in from Tether. You can see another wallet address where some comes in from Bitfinex. Full disclosure, I was a investor in the private equity there as well. And you can see money coming in from SoftBank, and you can see money coming in from the private fundraise that they did. And you can check. So they are publishing the wallet addresses, which is how people are starting to distinguish. Now, as I said, I'm sharing what's happening in Bitcoin, but I shared previously how I believe that these public companies on stock markets is not the game that most people should be playing. It gives you Bitcoin exposure, but it adds counterparty risk. And what are these counterparties going to do as they all compete with each other? They're going to find ever new ways of trying to distinguish themselves from others. And therefore, they're going to go further and further down the risk curve as they introduce human problems, counterparty problems, stock market problems, all of these things that can go wrong, as opposed to just simply owning your Bitcoin in a private key. But anyway, 21 Capital, unlike Strategy, has published the wallet addresses, which we call proof of reserves. It's a normal, standard in our industry to do that. We also had them announce that they bought 10,500 additional Bitcoin, which at the time was worth over $1 billion. Bitcoin right now on the Elon news and the Trump news, for some reason had a bit of a correction. It seems to have recovered to a good degree for now. A little bit of irrationality in the short term, maybe some insider trading. But anyway, we also had further announcement from 21 Capital that has raised another $100 million in order to purchase more Bitcoin. And this is now means that public companies that are converting themselves to Bitcoin, treasury companies, which means they're a public company that purchases Bitcoin, and the value of the Bitcoin somewhat underwrites the floor price in terms of a hard asset. In the last quarter or so, they purchased about 95,000 Bitcoin, and they've raised billions more in order to buy. And there is lots of, people that are investing in these public companies. It's somewhat become the new ICO. Every year we have these new trends, or every couple of years. Last time it was meme coins. Before that, it was yield on Bitcoin. Before that, it was the initial coin offerings. Before that, it was alternative blockchains. Before that, it was cheaper, faster, better altcoins as alternative to Bitcoin. They all come and go, and they all create these speculative bubbles. And this is the latest one. Some of the people that were investing on the insider stage, they're getting 25x, 15x, 10x returns. And most of them are probably selling those onto people like yourself that didn't have access to those deals, but are coming in later. That's exactly what happened in the initial coin offering phase, as it normalizes to the real value over the long term versus the hype and speculative value. But at the same time, we started to get more and more announcement. There was announcement from a Spanish coffee chain called Vanardi. If you're a Vanardi coffee, if you're in Spain, you may be familiar with that brand. I haven't been to Spain for a while, since pre-COVID. I think last time I went was Valencia. But they're now raising up to $1 billion to take a coffee shop and buy Bitcoin to become a Bitcoin treasury company. Now, I'm starting to notice a trend here. And that trend is that we're moving to this radically changing world of artificial intelligence, where traditional business models are being disrupted. And one of the strategies is people are somewhat looking to hedge themselves, raise finance, accumulate Bitcoin with the fact that they're a public company. And then that underwrites the price of that company. When they transition to a very disruptive world, they have an asset that can, provides the net asset value of that company, even if they get disrupted. And then they can pivot to being a Bitcoin treasury company. It's an interesting business model. I'm not talking about you investing in it, but it's very interesting to watch, because public companies attract a certain type of investor, particularly as there are now ETFs. And ETFs have to have exposure to all of these Bitcoin treasury companies, which means that creates a bid and buy volume. And TradFi will always like to create products out of very simple things like Bitcoin. And MicroStrategy via MicroSaylor has certainly kicked off a wave of these Bitcoin treasury companies. Speaking of which, the original one, Strategy, it used to be called MicroStrategy, is now Strategy, MSTR. It launched another public offering called STRD. This is basically a new perpetual bond, a new stock that is an initial public offering, and it is to select investors, and it adds some additional exposure onto the cap table, which promises to pay a 10% perpetual dividend in perpetuity, as it does things like monetizing volatility and crazy strategies. Now, what this does is it crowds out volatility and creates all sorts of weird unintended consequences. And I just want you to know that messing around with these things is adding more and more risk to it. Having fear obligations when there is a Bitcoin strategy, there is a certain price at which Bitcoin needs to be sold. It is significantly lower at this stage, but as you add more and more products, you end up with a black box which is harder and harder to track and requires ever more sophistication when we get these, and we always do in Bitcoin, when you get these systemic events that I covered in previous videos and what that looks like. I also this week went on Digital Asset News to discuss this very topic. I think it's coming out this weekend, and I'll make sure I upload it to my YouTube channel. There's a couple of videos that we're going to upload. I did one interview where we went through all the reasons why people don't buy Bitcoin and all the objections, so you can understand whether those are rational or whether you agree with them. We'll get that uploaded. And another one on this whole lending structure and this Bitcoin industrial complex that Wall Street is setting up, and how to kind of understand all the pitfalls. We'll get those up on my YouTube channel next week. Make sure you are a subscriber, hit the bell symbol, hit all, and you will get a notification. This is the third perpetual offering that I'm aware of within the MicroStrategy stack that's offering this 10% guarantee as well, and all the terms that go through it. I haven't done a deep dive into it, but it's I recommend the simple of Bitcoin, where you own the private key, for all the reasons that we cover on BitcoinHardTalk. Speaking of public companies, Japanese company Metaplanet, they're still continuing. They bought another 1,088 Bitcoin worth approximately $114 million. They now hold 8,888 Bitcoin worth approximately $930 million, approaching the $1 billion mark. For anyone in China, you'll know that the 888 is a very auspicious number as well. Now, what about the very large companies, the Magnificent Seven? Well, Meta, headed up by Mark Zuckerberg, aka Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, their shareholders, they rejected the vote in order to add Bitcoin to treasury. The way this works is if you are a particular shareholder in Meta, you can file submissions that they have to vote on in the shareholder meeting. They voted on it, and they rejected the idea of buying Bitcoin on the Meta balance sheet. In fact, 95% voted against the proposal. And so this is the traditional investors, including BlackRock. And it's very interesting that they're doing that. Now, it makes sense. I would say, as a Magnificent Seven stock, with the AI, with the Meta, all these different things that they're getting involved in, even the nuclear deals that Meta is now subscribing to in order to rebuild investments in nuclear power plants to get cheaper energy in order to plug into powering all this artificial intelligence with new, nuclear power plants that are being built in America. I think it's the perfect synergy to have some Bitcoin mining in there and also have some of that Bitcoin on the balance sheet. But at this stage, the shareholders of those very, very large Magnificent Seven, tech companies in US, they're dead against it at the moment, or their shareholders are anyway. What's happening on the other side of the world? Well, Hong Kong's realtor, one called Logtech, it made an announcement that it will be acquiring $1.5 billion of Bitcoin to add to the balance sheet of its public company as well. We had, meanwhile, in America, politician Vivek Ramaswamy from the Republican Party. His company, his asset managing company, Strive, They're going to be doubling the latest Bitcoin fundraise that they're currently engaged in. They're raising $1.5 billion in order to purchase more Bitcoin. And so now when you combine this, you've even got publicly traded company, another one, NBX, which upon the announcement of its Bitcoin reserve treasury strategy, it surged 138% after adopting a Bitcoin treasury strategy. So you can see how frothy this is. We now have, from last count, 61 publicly traded companies on NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange that hold approximately, by last count, and this is probably outdated by the time we published, 673,897 Bitcoin. That's approximately 3.2% of all the Bitcoin that will ever exist, because there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. The miners are mining away. They've got another Bitcoin to mine up until 2140, beyond our life, unless we've got some life extending technology. After that, it converts to just a fee model rather than block subsidy. But approximately 20 million Bitcoin have already been mined. Many of them have been lost in the early days, and only a couple of million of them sit on exchanges. And the amount that are available outside of cold wallets that don't move is getting smaller and smaller and smaller as more and more try to buy those Bitcoin, which is this is driving up the price, for the more and more people that want to buy these Bitcoin. And now we've got this treasury strategy that is starting to get real steam. Again, I'm not saying invest in these public companies. If you want to play around with that game, I like the simple things that everyone can do, and I like it in self-custody, because then you get to boycott the Federal Reserve. Rather than giving the wealth to BlackRock, you can boycott BlackRock by owning it in self-custody, and you have the simple life where you can engage in more meaningful things, knowing that historically you've outperformed, just by buying every month whatever the price is, you've outperformed every hedge fund or real estate, gold, every commodity, every stock, every index. And you don't feed the beast, and you don't need to engage in any debt as well. So it's a gift for those that are engaging in the fiat currency debt-based Ponzi scheme called proof of weapons, which indirectly means that you're funding wars and all sorts of stuff that, if you understood what was happening with your debt and the impact it had on people in this perpetual debt cycle, you may want to exit and boycott the system as well. So in all this to say, please don't buy this junk. I'm not saying you won't get money out of a quick pump and dump. I leave all the gambling personally. There is more than enough returns in Bitcoin. I can't give you financial advice. I can't promise the future. But ever since $3, I've been telling people own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. And I'm surrounded by billionaires that have come from an activist group that are now making meaningful difference in the world as they utilize their Bitcoin in order to actually make the changes that people are able to make, whether it be lobby or whether it be meaningful impact on share prices and deciding how to allocate your money, rather than just handing it over to the fund managers that prop up this debt-based proof of weapons violent system that is requiring more war right now in order to print fake GDP. We'll cover more of this in the macro section when we cover the big, beautiful bill. The moral of the story is that companies are basically choosing to own Bitcoin as their treasury, and in some cases they may be doing that over actually performing the activity that they historically performed, because all of this artificial intelligence, all of these robotics, and all of this economy that we are moving to, I think more and more people are starting to see that AI and robotics could disrupt pretty much everything as we know it today. So I believe that a bunch of companies that are going to be hedging against artificial intelligence, against robotics, will be taking the fiat currency that they already have, the cash flow while it lasts, and hedging themselves against disruption, and by putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And then we're going to get this really interesting two-tiered economy between those that own Bitcoin. And guess what is the most likely currency that artificial intelligence and agents will end up choosing? The programmatic one, the digital one, the one that they can't disrupt until a quantum computer comes along, and the community is already adjusting to that quantum reality as well. I covered more about that on the why, the objections around Bitcoin. Won't go through that right now. More public companies, Truth Social, Donald Trump's company, it made a formal filing for its Bitcoin ETF after stating that it would be raising billions of dollars in order to buy Bitcoin, after its sister company, World Liberty Financial, also issued billions of dollars in a stable coin backed by deals in the Middle East in order to earn yield off the higher yield. Basically, stable coins, you put your dollars in, you get a digital version of a dollar that you can send globally, and then the issuer gets to reinvest that into government debt like treasuries. And so the Trump administration, from a $2 billion deal, can earn $60 million for World Liberty Financial and his group of companies. And guess who's negotiating deals with the Middle East? Steve Witkoff, who is also a shareholder in World Liberty Financial. Now, Truth, the Truth Social media company, has been filing to issue its own Bitcoin ETF. Meanwhile, in TradFi, BlackRock, I believe the creator of the Operation Choke Point 2.0 mission to take down some of the crypto industry so that it could get its own Bitcoin BlackRock ETF approved, Itbit. It has now basically seeing this month record intakes into its ETF. So for this month, there was an inflow of $6.35 billion that was used in order to accumulate Bitcoin exposure via the Bitcoin exchange traded fund. So this is people that have money in traditional pensions, those that run big portfolios. They have been converting some of their stocks, their investments, their fiat currency into Bitcoin via these Bitcoin ETFs. And we started to, so there is billions and billions of dollars, and it was the highest it's been in May. We also saw talking about Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein's banker, the one that settled millions of dollars with, victims of Jeffrey Epstein in very large settlement trades. The one headed up by Jamie Dimon all over the Epstein files. All of the different bankers that we've seen, if anyone has been following the Epstein files. So the $3.6 trillion asset manager, JP Morgan, it is starting to accept Bitcoin and crypto ETFs as collateral for loans. So what is the play here? It's obviously not JP Morgan Chase, the retail bank, allowing you to deposit your Bitcoin and then you can borrow against it as collateral, while that may eventually happen. This is more of the corporate treasury that is realizing that all these people that are putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet, maybe they can incentivize them to own it with Bitcoin BlackRock ETF instead. And then you can use that BlackRock Bitcoin ETF to borrow more Bitcoin. And when you borrow dollars from JP Morgan, and then they'll take that dollars and they'll buy more Bitcoin, then borrow against that in their Bitcoin ETF, and then borrow against that and create this crazy scheme that we saw throughout 2022 that creates the speculative cycle that people are getting over and over leveraged. And they may even do it with the leveraged Bitcoin ETF. So this is what TradFi does. Now, it doesn't change anything about Bitcoin because Bitcoin was built on proof of work. Proof of work means that it doesn't matter who owns it, and you can own it in self-custody, where you own your own money, spend your own money, and you don't need to engage in these elaborate products that TradFi will be using in order to engineer some kind of pump and dump at some point, because they need your Bitcoin, because they're invested in the global multipolar world that I've been discussing on many previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, that Trump, that works for the banks, is delivering through its tariff policies. More on that in the macro section. Now, what other announcements did we have this week? We saw Ross Ulbricht he published some of his wallet addresses. We know some of his wallet addresses when the community was funding his lawsuits, his legal defense, and eventually Trump did a presidential pardon of Russ Albright, the creator of Silk Road. We saw that it received 300 Bitcoin donation, approximately over $30 million. Now, immediately we publish that and you can track it. And the obvious question comes to mind, did he donate that to himself, as he is framing that as a Bitcoin donation? We will never really know because Bitcoin is pseudonymous. You can see once you identify a wallet address, you can have as many wallets as you want. You can identify that as yours, which is what was done when he was raising, and suddenly 300 Bitcoin comes in. Now, it's either a very generous person or it is somebody that has been sent that across to himself. Now it's a donation. You do the maths and you start to think about what that actually means. Right. Now, speaking of not just the corporations, what about at the state level? Well, at the state level within America, California just set to pass a bill which allows them to seize Bitcoin that is left idle on exchanges after approximately 3 years of basically inactivity. So what they're trying to do here is, if you're in California and you sign up to an exchange and it is maybe registered with the state of California as one of its money service licenses, and you don't log in and you don't do KYC request for up to 3 years or something, and they can prove inactivity, then they can just quite frankly, seize your Bitcoin. So assets can directly be taken by the state under what's called an unclaimed property law that exists within the state of California. So the bill has now heads to the Senate. So it has been passed by Congress, and I think it's trying to be approved by Senate now. And so what this is coming after is when you pass away, inactive, whenever those things, they get their free Bitcoin. And this is their Bitcoin strategic reserve strategy. They can pass a Bitcoin strategic reserve strategy, which says they don't need to sell it. They can hold it on their state balance sheet and they can steal it from you. This is the remnants of the 1933 default that America did, where it asked everybody to hand in their gold for approximately $30. But here's a neo version of it. You can use inactivity laws to creep towards that, where California state can build their own Bitcoin strategic reserves, not by buying it, not by doing it legitimately, but through confiscation. So everybody wants your Bitcoin. How do you protect yourself from that? Own it in self-custody. That is not going to be an inactive self-custody wallet address. That is going to be based upon you storing your Bitcoin, what they classify as inactive. And obviously, if you live in California, you need to make sure that you understand what's happening on that. On the election side, the different types of politics that's happening, if you're tracking where countries are going with Bitcoin, we had a pro-Bitcoin president, basically a new presidential candidate. I think his name is, sorry if I butcher this name, Nawrocki. He just won the Polish election within Europe. So we'll see, can Poland, which is one of the more fast-growing countries within Europe, they had to take in a lot of Ukrainian immigrants. And there has been a lot of crime ratcheting up there as part of the strategic weakening campaigns. I uploaded a video to this week around manufacturing civil unrest. Really important message. Head over to, if you're not watching this on YouTube, make sure you go back and watch that video. I cut it out of a previous episode, but I want you to understand why there is so much civil unrest and how it is being manufactured in order to use that civil unrest to usher in a surveillance state. And this is happening across Europe, across UK, and it will be coming to America as well. And so we shall see what happens in the Polish side. I recommend all European countries to be building their Bitcoin strategic reserve, because BlackRock and the other members of the proof of weapons network, the investment banks, the military companies, the technocracies, the consumer-based companies, they have been engaged in a strategic weakening. Now they have the European Union and the European Central Bank as tools to weaponize against the European and the British people. And now governments no longer serve their people. They serve the corporate agenda of those that basically our politicians are controlled by. Meanwhile, over in Asia, across the other side of the world, South Korea, they just elected a pro-Bitcoin president as well, after they had all of that drama around the, the martial law. I'm sure a coordinated operation to strategically weaken South Korea that led to the protests and the unrest that came from that. And suddenly you get a regime change. And so you'll notice that we're getting all of these regime change operations in order to move across to pro-Bitcoin candidates and the whole far right side, whatever you want to call that, so that they can ratchet up the civil unrest campaigns around the narratives of anti-immigration. And I'm not taking a political view. I believe all legal immigration should be done. People should understand what these policies are for. For example, in US, they're very deliberately having a strategy of Silicon Valley companies hiring Indian immigrants through H-1B visas in order to build new technology, AI and agents to replace the workforce of those American workers. There are very strategic elements of what these are. And obviously they can ratchet up the narrative to make you blame them so that they can create the civil unrest, so that they can introduce the laws to change that. But anyway, there was the South Korean new prime minister. He made a promise within the campaign to legalize Bitcoin ETFs and set up a fair, move some of the unfair regulations. If you don't know the history of investing in South Korea, there are very, very strict, tight controls on what you can invest in. And so they want you to invest in real estate and various other things. And the reason that there was a massive, what we called the kimchi premium during the ICO bubble, where many in South Korea were investing in many of these token sales, and there was a massive premium for Bitcoin that was people were arbitraging between if they could get money into South Korea via Japanese banks and various other things. There was a way of arbitraging the price differential because South Korea, through these tight investment restrictions, they're not able to invest in what they want, and they were able to invest in these tokens outside of the financial system. It created a speculative bubble, but there is looking like there may be an opening up of the market and the unwinding of some of these restrictive regulations that might stop people being able to invest in Bitcoin. Why? Because they'd rather you do it via their bank, via their ETF product. You can see that this is coordinated action to try and get it where you own Bitcoin with them so that they can protect themselves as we transition to this multipolar world order. We saw in Romania, the largest postal services in Romania is going to be selling Bitcoin directly from the post offices. And they were saying that they said Bitcoin and crypto at over approximately 5,000 locations. So in Romania, you can go to your post office and purchase that Bitcoin at approximately 5,000 locations. Meantime, over on the BRICS side, Russia announced that it's going to be using their biggest state-controlled bank and their lender, which is Spenbank, and they're going to be launching a Bitcoin structured bond. What that essentially means is that if you invest in this Bitcoin structured bond, the issuer will be having the Bitcoin exposure, and most likely they will be guaranteeing a yield on that bond. They get to keep the upside while they guarantee that they can pay the yield on that bond. And so basically the bond holder and bond issuer, the state-controlled bank within Russia is looking to increase their Bitcoin exposure while they issue these different bonds. And this could be done at the sovereign level, where they can maybe, we don't know the exact yield that they will be paying for this structure, but essentially it is a bet on Bitcoin that it will outperform, and they can guarantee a yield, and then they'll do all sorts of things. Maybe they'll borrow against that Bitcoin as collateral, and then they'll hedge some of the currency risk. That's what a structured product means. And they're going to be planning to list these Bitcoin bonds as structured products on the Moscow Stock Exchange. At the same time, Russia's Moscow Stock Exchange actually launched and started trading in Bitcoin futures. So you can see that they're setting up the Bitcoin products that they need in order to issue more bonds using Bitcoin. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the largest purchaser of those bonds will in fact be China in the BRICS corridor. And this could be how BRICS, where Russia has been mining Bitcoin all this time quietly, has built its Bitcoin strategic reserves, is now issuing Bitcoin bonds, listing them on the Moscow Stock Exchange, making a market where China can trade with Russia, India, South Africa, Iran, Egypt, and various other members like Indonesia. They're able to trade with each other without the dollar, which ushers in the potential highest performing bonds that pay the highest yield because they're backed by Bitcoin, which fundamentally changes the market, opens up the game theory for other countries to start issuing bonds against Bitcoin, and hyper accelerates the journey of maybe states in America doing Bitcoin bonds. Maybe some of these corporate treasury companies doing Bitcoin-backed junk bonds. You can see where this is all going. Again, I don't recommend any of these financial products, but you can see how we bottom up get a Bitcoin standard by this sovereign adoption, corporate adoption, individual adoption, and we can move towards this bottom-up peaceful Bitcoin standard where people can create these financial products as well. And so is it just coincidentally that a Chinese think tank came out and said that Bitcoin is transforming from a speculative asset to a strategic reserve asset? Is it also a coincidence that the organizations like the International Monetary Fund, which is essentially a global bank that has the largest member, the largest voting member, the largest contributor, US, which acts as a US corporate interest proxy, may also be deviating, as America and Elon Musk are asking, to defund some of these United Nations International Monetary Fund contributions, which weakens American soft power, shrinks it to a regional power. But at the same time, the IMF is still saying that it's raised concerns, just like it did over the El Salvador Bitcoin strategy. It's now said that it has red flags over Pakistan's announcement that is going to be building a Bitcoin mining plan where they're going to be allocating 2,000 megawatts or whatever it may be towards Bitcoin mining to build their Bitcoin strategic reserves. You are starting to see at the highest level that the game theory is playing out. And so you can see, again, I reiterate, I don't believe that these are products that maybe some people, these are the corporate products, these are the structured products. This is where the manipulators come in and they try and create a complex in order to scam you out of your Bitcoin and manipulate price, create margin calls, all the stuff I covered in previous videos. But this is the bottom-up Bitcoin standard that is being built because, as we go through in the macro section, there are serious concerns about America's credit rating right now and America's strategy to refinance its debt. And so with that now, we're going to be going over to part 2, which is this week in macro. But that is everything that happened this week in Bitcoin. And what I'd like you to do, I'm going to take a quick water break as we go through to the next section. But this week in macro, we're going to be covering how macro has become a Jerry Springer show, how it relates to Musk, the public war between Musk and Trump, how that relates to the big bill, how that relates to the macro section, Jeffrey Epstein and Palantir, and some of the competitions for a social credit score that's being built on the macro side. So it's going to be a little bit of politics, movement at the micro level, but at the macro trends as well. Now, what I'd love for you to do, we are almost at 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. Thank you so much for everybody that subscribed. We had about 10,000 subscribers approximately over the last couple of episodes. As soon as I get to 100,000 subscribers, we're going to be able to get this message out to more and more people. We're going to be able to get my content reviewed by YouTube, and we can then push the algorithms with a blue check, and we can reach more people because time is running out for people to protect themselves in this transition that we are experiencing of a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. And I don't want your family and your loved ones to be on the wrong side of CBDCs. I want them to be sovereign with Bitcoin. So what that means is please subscribe to the channel. Help me get above 100K. We can get that review. Now, if during that review they decide to censor me because we had a shadow ban for many years, which seems to have been lifted now that we got this spike in subscribers, we're backing up everything on Rumble. And so if you're on Rumble, we're live there as well. Head over to Rumble, follow me over there, because if anything goes wrong with that review, we'll be moving to Rumble. And in case Rumble goes wrong, we back everything up onto our own server at the BitcoinHardTalk membership portal. There you can get additional videos that are no longer available anywhere else, like the Great Depression of the 2020 video series, where I got everyone ahead of this and all of these trends. And also a digital copy of the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin that I wrote in 2011 that predicted and got people ahead for many of the things that are happening right now. So get yourself a free membership portal at BitcoinHardTalk. The BitcoinHardTalk membership portal, which is available at simondixon.com. And also, one final thing, head over to Apple Podcasts. If you can't watch this whole thing in one go, or you want to do it while you're at the gym or while you're driving, you can download it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and you can have it automatically downloaded and watch at your own time by following me over on those podcasts. So please take that action right now. And at the very least, repost if you're on X, share this across YouTube and share this with your family. I'm going to take a quick water, and then we're going to do part 2 this week in macro. Okay, welcome back, everybody, to part 2 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 84, where we're going to be going through the macro side this week in macro and how it relates to the public humiliation ritual and the real battle between America's richest person and the president of the United States, and some of the blackmail operations at the deep state, like Jeffrey Epstein, its connection to many of the geopolitical wars that are happening right now, and also the companies that are building the social credit score for everyday Americans, which is going to be 10 times worse than what's happening in China right now. How does that relate to macro? Everything's coming together. Everything's falling together. If you haven't watched part 1 of This Week in Bitcoin, I recommend you head over there so you understand how to protect yourself. But right now, in this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs that we're transitioning to, this is part 2, This Week in Macro. Right. So if you've watched previous episodes, you'll know that I've been talking about these destabilization campaigns. And I talked about and released a video around how you manufacture civil unrest in order to destabilize so you can change laws. And then you can use those law changes in order to usher in the legal changes that are needed for a surveillance state. And much of that is happening right now. So make sure you're aware of that as well. So I believe the US destabilization campaign to push the world and America into a multipolar world order based upon America becoming a technocracy and backing their debt by newly issued stablecoins by the same technocratic stablecoin issuers that will be using the US debt in order to roll over the Ponzi scheme and then earn the yield at the higher rates to buy more Bitcoin as they hedge and protect themselves in this multipolar world order. The destabilization campaign has been ratcheting up. Now, part of that is to take all of the institutions that made up the deep state in America and all of the institutions and call into question everything. I believe that this was done at the proof of weapons network level. You can go back to previous videos on my YouTube channel and look at understanding the proof of weapons network. It is a network of multinational global institutions, financial, technology, military, consumption, pharma, that are all consolidated together into asset managers, being the largest shareholders and board seats like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, that are able to influence capital flows in order to utilize some of the companies that control the deep state, like the military industrial complex and banking companies that own the shares in the Federal Reserve, so that they can use technology to push out influence in monetary policy across the central banks, fiscal policy across those like Treasury that are using BlackRock's technology, multinational organizations like the International Monetary Fund, the Bank for International Settlements, and the asset managers that are managing their funds using BlackRock's technology and being shareholders in each other. You're able to influence global capital. You're able to influence wars in order to strategically manage a portfolio for profit maximization, which has no consideration of what's in the national interest of a company, of a country, or the people. And that is why we are, and you're able to use lobby money in order to take over control of Congress, prime ministers, senates, judicial process, influence that. Prime ministers, whatever the structure of your country is. Now, part of that destabilization campaign was tariff policy. What does this do? It makes small to medium-sized businesses go bankrupt and be acquired up to the large multinational corporations and BlackRock portfolio companies. Same at the export-driven countries. At the individual level, through higher prices, that leads to an inflationary effect. And then it also makes it where capital outflows strategically lowers the dollar. And so the dollar DXY is below that $100 level, increases the cost at the 10-year and 30-year to borrow, which is good for the backing of the stablecoin issuers that we covered in part 1. And then you can try and refinance the debt, but you get capital outflows where people sell their treasuries, or countries sell their treasuries, like China, Japan, and then they buy their own currency, which weakens the dollar relative to other currencies. The inflation decreases the purchasing power of everyday Americans, transfers wealth from Main Street to Wall Street and large multinational corporations, which is exactly what's happening right now as a result of the tariff policy. And then it draws capital where organizations like BlackRock are investing in BRICS and GCC regions and this multipolar world order. And you can basically use war in order to make a lot more profit for various countries and weaken the regions to optimize your portfolio. So part of that is to always create pump and dump screens for the hedge funds and just create chaos. And Trump is manufacturing chaos. And so what did we have to manufacture chaos this week? Well, steel and aluminum. As a British person, we call it aluminium. Americans call it aluminum. They took the tariffs up to 50% from 25%. The U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, the one that used to work for George Soros in order to make the $3 billion profit that was made for the George Soros Investment Fund by trading against the Bank of England and crashing the pound. He started to accuse China of holding back certain products that are essential for all U.S. industry supply chains. And so this calls into question, this creates, this calls into question, weakens the market more capital outflows, more purchases of foreign currencies, more decrease in the value of the US dollar, and more overperformance by alternative stock markets, as you have this repatriation of capital, and you reset the world order. Trump and President Xi Jinping, the president of China, they held their phone call conversation this week, and they were going to be discussing trade. That created a pump cycle in the market this week, and they didn't really give much updates. So there's no real updates from the call today, just general language in order to make more pump and dump cycles. On the Japan side, an essential part of the proof of weapons network, the Bank of Japan said that their economy can handle the impact of US tariffs. Now, Japan has a massive trade surplus and almost 230, I can't remember, 230 or 260% debt to GDP. And it is essentially a zero interest environment. And they are having their interest rates increase, which broke the carry trade. But this is repatriation of capital back to America. And this is a strengthening of the Japanese won relative to the US dollar as well, which makes up some of that basket of currencies in the index DXY as well. Now, this week we did see the yield on the 10-year and 30-year treasury come down a bit. So the market liked this news. It came back slightly. And so you have to make more. This is a positive campaign on this side, which you can ruffle up with more negative campaigns. Eventually, volatility dries up as the market becomes more neutral to the manipulation. But they do have a massive trade surplus. And so we shall see. I covered in previous videos, if you want to understand the relationship between US and Japan, I did the US and Japan debt-based Ponzi scheme and how those relate to each other. But it's looking more like that Japan is dumping more and more US treasuries, which is what's leading to this strengthening of currency as nationalism in America leads to nationalism everywhere. And so the desired impact. But remember, you cannot solve America's debt-based Ponzi scheme with tax reform. You have to do it with monetary reform. And there is no indication of monetary reform. In fact, the opposite, rolling over the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And that was the opposite of the promise of what tariffs were originally meant to do in the first place. And so hopefully more and more people are waking up to that. At Bitcoin Hard Talk, from day one, we prepared you for that. We were I was getting everyone ready for Liberation Day on April the 2nd. And I was getting everybody, I was the one that said what the three main impacts of these tariffs would be. And so far, it has turned out to be exactly that. While everyone was confused, because I follow the money at the top level rather than listening to the politicians and listening to the media, which is the opposite of what always happens. But even if they Japan decoupled from the US, basically the hedge funds will still need a way of, they will undo that trade, and America will still need a monetary reform because it can't have the desired impact unless you just roll over and increase the debt as well. Now, this is the really interesting thing, and we'll be covering more around the public fight between Elon and Trump so you understand it. But at the same time, just before we go through that, there were conflicting messages around jobs. And jobs is often manipulated where they publish certain numbers as forecasts, and when the real ones come out, they publish that number, which looks better than expected, and then they have to adjust it later because they overpump those job numbers. So again, this is strategic weakening. You can't trust the data anymore. But at the same time, many of the corporations at the micro level were announcing layoffs. So Disney is set to, they've had lots and lots of layoffs, but they announced hundreds of employees that are going to be laid off. Now, I'm interpreting that as an artificial intelligence play. I mean, if you look at what Google AI has been releasing, you can make a Hollywood level production or even a Disney animation with commands right now. And that's only going to get better and better and better. This is the equivalent. Disney is like the blockbuster. And they only keep it in the portfolio so that they can manipulate narratives through Disney. And it's kind of like a mind control game as well for certain agendas. Hollywood has always been that. And so when Trump announced tariffs on Hollywood, this is strategic weakening as well of certain of the key soft power assets. Disney is one of those such companies. But you can make the equivalent of a Disney movie or animation for free very soon, if not already. And you can have agents working on distribution channels. This is how disruptive this technology is. And this is why all countries are going in on their adjustment to the AI strategy as well. Microsoft, they made a further announcement. They said that they're cutting hundreds more jobs. This is just weeks after they cut 6,000 jobs. And I think this is mainly around developer jobs as well. And so developer jobs seem to be going at the lower level. Artificial intelligence is making it possible for anybody to do vibes and command-based coding as well. And agents are getting more and more proficient at roles that used to be done by developers. So the wage rate for developers is shrinking. And if they're not willing to accept it, jobs are going, and they're hiring many of these Indian H-1B visas in the case of America, and the same trends in other countries like UK in order to build a new team to replace those jobs as well. Times are really changing fast. If you're not adjusting to a world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs, then you really are running out of time in order to make these adjustments. You should be meeting with your family. You should be treating your whole family as a unit, and you should be coming up with a strategy. If you're too old to be in this game, then you need to be working with the younger generations. If you're not the technically literate person, then rather than going to university and spending 3 years on skills that will be completely inappropriate, that were funded to make economists debt dealers for bankers anyway, and doctors drug dealers for big pharma anyway, because research is funded and we've got protests across these colleges because people don't want their money going to these alternative agendas and defunding campaigns. And now they're using that to change the First Amendment to say you're a terrorist if you support these different agendas, so that they can basically call you the terrorist whenever they want to weaponize it against you, and usher in this surveillance state that everything's moving towards, that they beta tested in the UK. If you're not adjusting to this right now, you are denying reality. You must be making adjustments. You must come up with plans. You've got the opportunity to lean in to the fact that artificial intelligence is here. Make sure you earn as much fiat currency as possible. Make sure you boycott that fiat currency from the Federal Reserve System by staving it in Bitcoin, so that you can build economic and sovereign power by outperforming historically. Can't promise the future. That if it happens again, just like Trump is doing for himself, not his country, just like BlackRock is doing for the banks, then you should be following the money, not what they're saying, because you're able to, save in Bitcoin, and don't own it with BlackRock if you can avoid that, so that you can then, rather than make BlackRock richer, you can boycott BlackRock, and then you can have your own sovereign power as well by owning it in self-custody. But anyway, some of the numbers came out. There was a huge ADP, which is the automatic data. Let me make sure I get that. Automatic data processing data. And they came out with their jobs, and they predict the jobs, and then they missed it significantly. But there was more data today that did the exact opposite. So very conflicting message. But with the print on the actuals, they only had 36,000 private payrolls were added this month versus a projected 114,000 expected jobs. So that's a big miss. But again, the data that came out this week was the conflicting, and then maybe next week they'll reprint it and adjust it accordingly. But that's according to that data, and we can't trust it, but that is a big slowdown in hiring. This is early signs that the US labor market maybe, slowing down fast, but we had speeding up with the data today. So you have to go a little bit deeper and look into the sectors. Haven't done that analysis, might do it in the future. Leave in the comments below if you'd like to see stuff. But my guess is this really is the adjustment to the AI, the artificial intelligence agents are starting to have hiring freezes and new teams being built in order to replace old people. And eventually that goes into robotics. So you got this window of opportunity as we transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. And you need to make sure you're not on the universal basic income with no freedom on a central bank digital currency. So I still don't believe that at the next Federal Reserve cut, when the FOMC meeting the FOMC meet, I don't think you're going to get a rate cut. I don't believe that that's going to happen. And whether we get quantitative easing, what triggers that? There's obviously a lot of drama in the destabilization campaign where Trump is kind of having these public fights with Jerome Powell. Trump and Jerome Powell are both middle management for the banks. The banks are the shareholders in the Federal Reserve. They are the ones that make the decisions with their board and the FOMC. And then the chairman, Jerome Powell, is the one that reads out the script. And Trump, the same. He raises money and raises capital and is allowed to be president by pleasing the corporate backers that control the lobbies and control what is needed in order to ruin a career. And Trump gets to make a lot of money by aligning his interest with the corporates. He doesn't really, he doesn't need the vote. This is just because the corporates control the media. And so therefore you can influence all of those processes. Even with those numbers, I don't think we're going to see rate cuts anyway. So that's the prediction. And Trump is pushing for 100 basis points and looking for a 1%. And so when it doesn't happen, you can have this public fight when really, this is theater if you've been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk and when we go through some of these talks as well. Now, Trump publicly came out and aligned with one of those nodes, those politicians, Elizabeth Warren, that works for the banking lobby, that was an essential part of Operation Choke Point 2.0 under the Biden administration. They both basically serve the same banks because Trump is more aligned with the banking lobby than military lobby. Biden was more aligned with the military lobby. That's why you had a slightly different policy. But remember, this whole conversation around paying off the debt, the banks are who sets the policy. And the banks, they hold about $10 trillion in the US debt. That lobby has no interest in ever changing the amount of debt. They don't want that ever to be repaid. It's always rolled over. And so even stating that the debt can be repaid is just a psyop in itself. It can't be repaid. Unless you reform money, the dollar is debt, and debt requires interest to be repaid. And because that interest doesn't exist, you have to create an environment where more people are willing to buy those bonds, lend to corporations, so that you can borrow from the bank, create more money in a debt-based Ponzi scheme. It can't be repaid. So all of this is theater or ignorance. But it is a debt-based Ponzi scheme. That is the construct of the dollar. And Trump is proposing to abolish the debt ceiling, basically altogether, because Trump is a debt broker for the banks. And so is Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. What did he come out with on some of his public Truth Social posts? He said, I agree with Senator Warren. This is what Trump was saying. The debt limit should be entirely scrapped. So Elizabeth Warren from the bank lobby and Trump, funded by the bank lobby, his largest contributor for the campaign was the Bell and banking dynasty. If successful, this would remove basically Congress's obligation to vote on whether you should raise the debt ceiling. Now, this is paving the way for essentially unlimited borrowing. Now, it may come up with a $5 trillion cap, which allows the Trump administration to go beyond $40 trillion without having to get any accountability towards it. But this is the type of policy that they're looking to squeeze in these decisions around the big, beautiful bill as well. Now, this is great if you are a stablecoin issuer, as I covered in part 1, which World Liberty Financial is, which is Steve Witkoff and the Trump family as well, via their children and their family trust interests. And so they are looking to move really, really fast to essentially break things and try and get this big, beautiful bill through. The more that you break things, the more the stablecoin issuer benefits. So remember, the US national debt is actually a tool for those that control America, the banks, to be able to control, because those that are lending the money are able to exert that influence and they'll be able to receive the yield. And whenever they issue a mortgage, they're able to create that money out of thin air using the bond and the debt as a backing, as collateral, and create trillions and trillions of dollars of mortgage loans and mortgage-backed securities that the investment bank is then able to securitize so that they can sell to asset managers like BlackRock that's managing your money so that they get more control. And they've created this stateless entity that controls America and controls Europe and controls UK and is not accountable to any force. It's like a Dutch East India Company. And that's why the politicians don't work for you. They work for them. It's the debt is a national matter because you, the people, you pay for it. You pay for it through inflation. You pay for it through wealth inequality. And you pay for it through having to hand over money management to organizations like BlackRock so they can take your share voting rights and they can manage it on your behalf. And so this is a tool of influence. The national debt is built in. They can then lobby in order to get the national debt over to corrupt contracts like the big, beautiful bill. It's basically the citizens' responsibility to take care of the national debt, which is why you have all of that wealth inequality and civil unrest when it goes to the extreme like it is right now. And then they change laws in order to usher in a surveillance state so you can't protest. So the proof of weapons network that I've covered, they are the ones that thrive on this government debt. And so while citizens basically drown in, basically the hidden tax called inflation, and while less and less money is used for public services, that creates more and more civil unrest, more and more wealth redistribution. And so that is factored into the equation when you run a debt-based Ponzi scheme. And then people are like, why am I broke? Why is no one fixing the potholes in the streets? Why is no one looking after the homeless? Why is there crime everywhere? Why is there mental illness and no help for veterans? Why are they addicted to drugs? Why is there all of these things happening? Why is there no bridges that are falling? Why is there infrastructure investments that aren't happening? Because they no longer control and the government no longer works for you. So basically, Trump coming along and saying that he's going to pay off the national debt, it was essentially be like an asset manager dumping cash into the jump bond market with no yield. It ain't ever going to happen. You're not going to buy bonds that pay no yield and just give cash to corporations so that they can make the money. So paying off the debt has always been a lie. And anybody that says it without a monetary reform is just playing in theatrics as well, or ignorance. It will never happen. The proof of weapons network, with currently BlackRock as CEO, as the most important asset manager, who holds shares in all of the different banks, all of the different military companies, and of course, $10 trillion in bonds, is profiting from chaos, not fixing chaos, because the technology companies can then come along and fix the problem of chaos. And so Trump isn't here to fix America. Trump is here to profit alongside the proof of weapons network, which has its he's basically a representative for the portfolio companies in negotiating deals that help them, not America. And that's what he was doing. I covered that in all of the Saudi trips when America, when I said Trump is selling off America and various other things. The proof of weapons network isn't here to play savior in any way, shape, or form. In fact, they're quite the opposite. They're willing to create wars, they're willing to fund wars, and they're willing to create technology that creates, even in case of Gaza, genocide as a service, occupation as a service. These are all the beta tests. The surveillance state that's happening in Europe and UK. This is all money that you're paying inflation with that's recycled into the corporate contractors that is then used to bribe the politicians so that they work for you. The Constitution was to protect you in America from the tyranny of government, but it never protected you from the tyranny of corporations becoming more important than the government and the government working for those corporations. They're not accountable to anybody, which is why you see what you see, and then they need you distracted with believing that you need to change politicians instead. They work for profit. They don't work for philanthropy in any way, shape, or form. And it's nothing personal against you. It's just the way that it's systemically structured. They operate this way globally as well. They have no national agenda in any way, shape, or form. They treat basically every state just like it is a cash cow. And when the cash cow no longer bleeds what they want, they no longer care about the people. They just change the algorithm, change capital flows, and start to say, Europe, you can be a vassal state for European war. And they create narratives by funneling that money into non-governmental organizations, media control, and various other operations. So all that to say is, why did we have this public argument between Elon and Trump? And I've been thinking about it deeply. So let's get into that. In general, Elon is subservient. He's like one of the entrepreneurs, but got involved in politics. And so he is higher up on the proof of weapons network than Trump himself, because presidents are lower down in the power structure. You kind of had central banks, then intelligence agencies, then you have the corporations and the banks, and then you have government underneath. But technology is kind of changing that power play as military becomes, which controls the deep state, controls the CIA, creates these wars, pushes out these narratives. And then the entrepreneurs that are wealthy, they get to contribute as a high net worth investor to some of the financial complex. But Musk also has technology, because military gave him space exploration to have his SpaceX, social credit score with, X and the algorithms that come from that, AI, Tesla data as well, driving data, and many, many different plays. So he sits in tech, and now military is becoming tech. He sits in that bucket as well. And so he kind of sits in the middle of that. We know that Trump is more aligned with bank and finance as a real estate guy, real estate entrepreneur. And also that is, comes across in many of the deals that he's personally benefiting on, pretending that it's MAGA. But let me just go through the sequence of events in case you missed them. I'm sure you watched them, but essentially, I'll pull out some of them. There was a lot more to it. There was a long space that I was on. If you're not following me on X, I do all the real-time updates there. But Elon tweeted after this big, beautiful bill. Now, remember, I covered it over the last couple of weeks, that this is the opposite of the promise. This is the opposite of Doge. Doge gave the data to the AI algorithms. And there was way more for Palantir, the other side of the PayPal mafia, which is Peter Thiel, than Elon's side. Now, he got some stuff in this big, beautiful bill, but this was a very hard one to read, because I didn't predict that Elon would create this carnage based upon just following the money. So I think there's something else at play here. But anyway, Elon tweeted out, "I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore." This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it. It's basically a gift to corporations as usual, but Elon Musk, that has been working for Doge, which has only been able to save 100 billion, ended up going to the White House. He got the key, and then they were all buddy. They were pretending that everything's all good. He didn't get the humiliation ritual because remember, everyone above Trump in terms of power doesn't get a humiliation ritual. Those below, he gives the humiliation ritual to. But it's basically, this bill was a gift to corporations, as I said. It's corrupt, it's theft from the American people, but it's business as usual. It's what a president is basically paid to do, and it's to prop up the debt-based Ponzi scheme, as usual. And it's to make sure that the dollar always has a way of refinancing and making sure those profits are stolen from the average American person that doesn't own those assets. And if they want to protect themselves, they have to own those assets, or they own Bitcoin, which beats the shit out of everything historically. Elon also came out and said that interest payments already consume 25% of US government revenue, and that if these deficits continue, there will only be money for interest payments and nothing else. While that is true, that is the systemic design. You can't pay down the debt, and so nothing stops this train, as Lynn Alden has been saying. And so Trump does what he needs to do for banks and financial institutions. Elon doesn't like it. And so Trump posted that Musk was basically wearing thin, and that he asked him to leave. So Trump was saying, in typical fashion, he asked Elon to leave. He added to that as well that Musk went absolutely crazy after losing the electric vehicle mandate. And so he's claiming that there was no pork for the electric vehicles. There was pork for General Motors and traditional gas guzzling vehicles as well, and the energy play that comes from that. And so basically he was blaming it on that. That started to create a public spat where basically Musk proposed different things. He proposed creating a new political party to represent essentially the 80% in the middle, which is quite correct. What he is saying is all true. Now, that would require monetary reform, and that would require taking on the power structure of banks and financial institutions, which Trump is not doing. Trump is working with the banks and financial institutions, rolling it over to stable coins to personally enrich and using Bitcoin as that mechanism while investing in the multipolar world order in the GCC countries like Qatar, UAE, Saudi, and also taking out loans from the head of BRICS like China through ICBC and building Trump Towers with those loans, as I said, while he effectively shorts the dollar and goes long Bitcoin to implement destabilization campaigns. And this is another destabilization campaign. But I'm not sure if it was by design, by any way stretch of the imagination. Elon Musk then came out and says that the US president is in the Epstein files, and that is the real reason why they have not been made public. Now, that's a bomb to those that don't know. Anybody that was following this under the Biden administration would know that certain parts of the Epstein files were already released. We covered that in BitcoinHardTalk. And there were lots of mentions of Trump's business relationship and his Mar-a-Lago and various other things. And there were pictures with Elon, with Ghislaine Maxwell, who's the partner of Jeffrey Epstein, that would groom these girls, create these blackmail rings, film in order to blackmail very famous people or influential people like banks and banksters. And many of those banks and banksters like JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon settled directly with those victims that were involved, because JP Morgan was the bank that was used, as well as why they wiped out Lehman Brothers back in the day and various other, when you follow the money and see these blackmail rings, because Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, who suddenly was taken out, was a Mossad agent deeply connected to Israel, the weapons trafficking rings. If you read the book by Whitney Webb, One Nation Under Blackmail, you'll learn a lot more. Follow some of Ryan Dawson's content, and he goes through in detail all of these different operations, who's involved, and even created a t-shirt and a map with the Epstein list by interviewing victims, reverse engineering various documents. So most of it is already known, and spoiler alert, it doesn't contain too many celebrities. It's got the royal family like Prince Andrew and various other ones, but it's mainly the banks and the different weapons trafficking networks and people behind the scenes and FBI agents and that type of stuff. To give you like a little bit of background, we've covered that just to give you so that then I can see where does this go and how does it try to macro and how does it get into the big bill as well. In 2002, basically New York Magazine quoted, I'll give you some of this, way more detail in Whitney Webb's book. But there was a quote where Trump essentially described Jeffrey Epstein. Now, this is a public quote. If you've been following documentaries, you'll know this already. And so this wasn't new information that he was releasing. If you remember, when Elon first acquired X, he released all of those different Twitter files and Epstein files. And this was during the Biden administration. And we were covering, those live as well and the different things that came from that on X Spaces. But it was basically the famous Trump quote that maybe people just didn't know about it, maybe because the largest account on X publishes it, and then that creates traditional media covering it as well. This gets mainstream attention to things that some people may not have known. But Trump described Epstein as a terrific guy, and he described him as somebody that likes beautiful women, and particularly on the younger side as well. And he was continuing to do business deals, even though this was known. Look, I've seen no evidence that Trump engaged in anything like, sexual activities with underage people. But we don't have the full information. And Elon was basically saying, this is the reason we don't have the full information. He also posted a video that was already out in the sphere. It was in 1992, basically, Trump partied with Jeffrey Epstein in his Mar-a-Lago. And he said that basically he's just going to leave that here for people to watch. So bringing attention where he's partying with lots of women, speaking with Jeffrey Epstein. And these things are all known, as I said. So he didn't release anything new, which means that it probably won't lead to a lawsuit. He's just bringing attention to public information and things that are already there. But after that bombshell, he also went and called for a US President Trump to be impeached, essentially, and replaced with J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, as you know, he's deep state. He was funded by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel, Palantir. Palantir was funded by the CIA venture capital Silicon Valley wing, in order to create artificial intelligence technology that has been used to create, genocide as a service, occupation as a service, surveillance in Europe, and also other types of technologies, even used in places like Saudi Arabia right now for managing Hajj. Eid Mubarak, anybody that's celebrating Eid right now, they're using artificial intelligence for legitimate reasons as well. And so, but it's all producing this data as well. So anyway, that's what we know about Elon and Trump in terms of the Trump files. There's more speculation on One Nation Under Blackmail, but I don't think these, are the same extent to many of the implicated bankers and Jeffrey Epstein himself. So it's drawing attention to that anyway. And so Trump has never really publicly talked about it. So it either forces him to address it, which makes me think that this isn't just some smoke and mirrors campaign. This isn't just, some kind of engineered strategy or distraction campaign, personally. Now, to bring it to today, they were meant to have a call today. So they scheduled a call to kind of broker peace between the two. But the meeting was cancelled, and we're getting more and more narrative and more drama and more reaction around it. Just to complete the picture as well, Elon himself has been connected to Jeffrey Epstein as well. So this could also indirectly come through. But again, it's all public information. It's already that we know. And I don't think if there was more to find out, I don't think Elon would be pushing at this string. Basically, there were some legal proceedings connected to JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon. And there were phone conversations and text messages with Ghislaine Maxwell and Elon Musk as well. He's been basically denying any of the personal associations with that. But in 2023, the US Virgin Islands, they issued a subpoena to Elon Musk. And as part of this lawsuit against JP Morgan Chase, they were requesting more information. And I personally believe that there were phone messages that were trying to entrap Elon between Ghislaine Maxwell and Elon's, emails that are designed to get him to reply. And then you could connect it to these photos with Ghislaine Maxwell in order to gain more power over Elon as part of this blackmail network for the deep state proof of weapons network, as part of Mossad, CIA, and how the military companies are able to use the intelligence network through MI5 as well in order to manufacture these wars for profits. That means that they can sit above these politicians and make sure that bills are only for the benefit and politicians' job is just to create a MAGA narrative or an acceptable narrative to make people think they work for them, and people are distracted, believing that they control through their vote the political process. Anyway, the British Virgin Island territory, they allege that Epstein may have referred or attempted to refer to Musk as a client of the bank. Refer Musk to a client of the bank. So apparently Epstein referred Musk. Whitney Webb, in her book and other public tweets, suggested that Epstein may have advised Musk, and it would have been more than just a referral. And there was advisory agreements based upon her research, or alleged ones, based upon the 2018 Tesla initiative in order to privatize Tesla. When there was that manipulation that led to the SEC case that didn't happen, that it remained a public company. And this was possibly involving funding from the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia. Those funds were invested in X in the end when you follow the money, which is still a private company. And that's leading to much of these AI deals and various other things that the proof of weapons network, and leading to me to believe that we're transitioning to this multipolar world order that I've covered. So as I said, these Epstein files were released on X during the Biden administration anyway. We had significant information, nothing new here. There is a massive lack of transparency, and Elon's hinting that there is a lot more to be seen, and he would like the X files, the Epstein files, to be released. And he is saying as Trump and his involvement is the reason why they're not there. So he's drawing attention to that. And that would protect, this is the individuals that I know that were involved based upon the information and the research that I've done. Is that, as I said, it's not famous people. It's all banksters, and many attempts to implicate some of these more, famous people or famous entrepreneurs as well. Trump did have that relationship from the 1980s to the 2000s. And so that was a 20-year relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, when you are involved in property, massive real estate transactions in New York, you have to be connected to the right people. That means that many of the deep state, whether it's the Jewish mob, the Italian mafia that's connected to CIA operations, some of the stuff that you would read about in Operation Gladio by Paul Williams, if you've read that book. But there were photographs taken throughout history around these events, and they've been used ever since as well, in Mar-a-Lago and various other things. In terms of Trump's involvement in 2002, there was that interview where Trump referred to Epstein as, the terrific guy, and the quote that was, shared by Epstein and his infatuation with beautiful women, showing that he knew that he liked women on the younger side. And apparently, according to the public records, Trump said that his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein ended in 2004. And this was due to a real estate dispute with Jeffrey Epstein. So what does that mean? What is all this? Now, I could come to the conspiracy theories, and many people have, and I would normally do that. But I actually think that in this occasion, I don't become fanboys of anybody, but under this occasion, I think Elon is just a wild card. I don't think this was part of any agenda or plan. I think this was Elon acting in his own plan, and I think he just wanted to do it. I think either he wanted to demonstrate the real power structure, that essentially he has checkmated Trump into a taco trade, because he will have to concede to this. He will have to comment on it, or he will actually have to reverse the big bill, and Elon can demonstrate that he's more powerful than the president of the United States. The reason I think Elon's working in isolation, because he has a lot of power himself. But the Proof of Weapons network, with BlackRock as CEO and all of the JP Morgans and various others that are involved in that network, they gain nothing by drawing attention to this. This is not something they want to draw attention to. In fact, they will fight releasing these files. And obviously, Trump is more connected to the banks. So they're aligned in this. And this does not help Elon in terms of his share price, in terms of his relationships, in terms of his financial interest. There may be a tension that he wanted because of the Palantir bit that we'll cover in a bit. But bankers are the main people that don't want any of this Epstein list to come out, and to create attention of it. JP Morgan has already settled, as I said. This doesn't serve the interest of the people that are in that as well. And they're aligned with that. So this is a problem for his relationship with the power structure and his self-interest. I actually believe that this is Elon deciding against his financial interest to be on the right side of history, because he knows what the end game of this is. He knows the multipolar world order, and he knows that he can squarely blame this on Trump in terms of what comes next. And in years ago, I said, when Trump comes into power again, he will probably be blamed for the fall of the US empire, and he can take his cult with him, saying it was a stitch up. But I don't think, this policy doesn't make America great again. And I think Elon wanted to disassociate himself. And I think it was completely I think he's taken on something that is going to be very damaging to him in his personal interest, but it's absolutely the right thing to do long term. So whereas Trump is acting in short term interest, I think Elon's working in long term interest here. So I don't think this was a distraction from the calls that were, the deals that were happening, the big things that were happening in the background between the lack of progress in the China trade war or anything. And I don't think this was engineered or designed. I think this is just not Trump. This is Elon being a wild card. And I don't think, this was coordination or known with Trump in any way, shape or form. I think this is him sticking to what he genuinely believes and thinking long term in general. I welcome your conspiracy theories in the comments, and I welcome as well. I put a poll on YouTube. If you go over to YouTube, there's a poll there in the live chat if you're watching that. And if you're watching the recording, you can see the result of that poll, maybe. But you can vote. Tell me, do you think who's doing the right thing here? Who's acting in the, who's doing, is it Trump doing the right thing here? Or is it Musk? And who are you behind? Because on this occasion, I think it's Musk doing the right thing. And I think it's demonstrating that Trump isn't MAGA at all. Because this is helping the big corporations at the expense of the American people. And I think on this occasion, Musk is trying to draw in a monetary reform, which is the right thing to do. But it may be some kind of hidden agenda. So in the final part of the macro section, I want to go through how this relates to the whole social credit score things that are being built. So in the big beautiful bill, there is significant budget towards military. It's about printing trillions of dollars. It's about increasing the debt ceiling. It's about rolling over, and it's probably going to be Genius Act and stablecoin bills that provide some of the untapped demand by doing deals with these large military companies. They pay the dollars. It's done via the stablecoin. The stablecoin then buys the treasuries. The American people pay. He gets the higher rates. And you can do more and more deals this way using the big bill as well. But there was an allocation for Palantir. And there was, snuck into this 1,000 pages, some seriously damaging stuff based upon what looks very unconstitutional. And we shall see where it goes. And maybe the reason this is trying to rush through, because if there are engineered civil unrest campaigns, this technology needs to be used for the American people, on the American people, after it's been beta tested in the UK and Europe. So Trump focused on the removal of the electric vehicle subsidies, which is billions of dollars that Tesla benefits from. And as a result of that, the Tesla share price, NASDAQ was down about just under 1%. And Tesla share price crashed 15%. And then it led to a 5% rebound today. So net about 10%. And the other things that were in the bill that I've covered previously were all the space exploration, go to Mars stuff, which is the Cold War between Russia, China, and America that will usher in trillions of dollars of corrupt money going towards the military industrial complex, the tech companies, and some of the other companies in this as well. Now, this bill definitely favored Palantir over some of the stuff that Elon wants to do with his social credit score by integrating stablecoins into XAI and X. Anyway, this is that's the sinister side. You could then link that to Peter Thiel, and this is some kind of coup. I think that's the MAGA narrative that Trump will take, that there's some kind of coup brewing up here, depending on where it goes. And maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. We'll keep covering it, but those are all the different types of theories that are more plausible based upon following the money. But anyway, Trump is moving full steam ahead with the big, beautiful bill, doubling down on it. And within that is using a database to hand over to Palantir to be weaponized and used against American people in making what China does with their social credit score, which is just for corporations, but this time using it for individuals within America. So this would be leapfrogging the social credit score for the American people. Basically, it's getting permission for Palantir Technologies to have a collaboration between basically Palantir Foundry platform and putting all the data across all the different federal agencies that maybe Elon already scraped through Doge, but then utilizing this into Palantir, which may be what the little rough is about. Now, what does this include? This includes all American health record data. This includes all of America's bank details. This includes all of American social services. And this puts it all into one central hub managed by Palantir, a private corporation, that was funded by the CIA deep state, the VC arm, through Silicon Valley, that connects right up to the military industrial complex and all the government contracts that are being used around the world. Maybe he would have preferred that data himself with Doge and Starlink and Tesla data. So anyway, there is a genuine struggle around there, around the PayPal mafia, and maybe they all work and connected to the same things. But I think this is Elon in this isolation, working on his own. As I said, this is going to be worse than what China happens. The technology for violence has been beta tested in Gaza, genocide as a service and occupation as a service. And Palantir has a major stake in all of these defense contracts that the big, beautiful bill ushers through. But here's an interesting thing about Palantir. While it has one side, the legacy model under Biden, the neocon model, where it's ushering in genocide as a service, at the same time, Palantir has contracts with the Gulf countries. I mentioned today that it's being used in order to manage people so that you don't have all of the Muslims that are going to Hajj and have them all in one place in one time. Artificial intelligence, there is different types of contracts in the Middle East with the Gulf countries that are being used with Palantir and the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, that if you've watched in the geopolitical section, I've said is going to be the important broker in the future vision that BlackRock and others, I believe, are invested in the multipolar world order, which involves US retreating. I'll cover more of that as again, have covered it in previous episodes, but more in part 3. But this is why I've been making those predictions by following the money that Israel is being strategically weakened, GCC will be the new power broker of the region, and US will be retreating. And we're getting the bank-funded model, which will lead to decolonization in the Middle East that requires normalization with Iran, which is while everyone's talking about war with Iran, I believe that there will be a nuclear deal. We haven't had one yet, but I believe that we will see one. Is because Palantir is also invested in the other side with the GCC. So you can exhaust everything that you get with Israel on the genocide as a service, and then you can jump ship over to the GCC and provide the artificial intelligence in the rebuild model as well. And so this is basically a corporate message that signals that money is changing hands, and they're just trying to wipe the money that's left on the table through the Israel genocides as a service, which is disgusting. The humanitarian crisis is a disaster. If I put my humanitarian hat, I'll be speaking very differently. But this is just following the money, and not to say what I want to happen, but to say what I believe is happening. And then they can switch the table, strategically weaken Israel at the opportune moment, and use those Palantir contracts as well for the rebuild as well. And it won't be abandoned, too soon. And so Palantir is kind of one of those companies where you can start to look at their public disclosure records, as I do with many of the military contractors, and it gives you an indication and a gauge of what the proof of weapons network is doing, and when they're going to abandon Israel as those contracts ratchet up with the GCC and ratchet down with Israel. So I'll cover more of that into the future as I watch that as well. But they have their foot in basically both sides, the technology side and the military industrial complex. The tech is really heavily aligned with the financial side and the banks at the moment, and they've created that more profitable model for the Middle East that I've covered in the geopolitical section, and I'll cover a bit more today in terms of what's happened today. So this is an example of how the same company can fund essentially both sides of a war, or have contracts with both sides of the war, which has always been the strategic tension model, but this is a different version of that when the genocide is going to be ending. Okay, let's see what else we got. So So I think, anyway, in summary, that's why we had this drama. And I could buy into the conspiracy theories, and I'd like you in the comment section below to tell me what your theory is. But I actually believe that this was Elon working on his own. There is a slight interest around the Palantir contract and that whole side. But I think he wanted to actually genuinely push Trump into a bind of doing what's right by the American people, knowing that the finance people won't allow him to do that, so that Trump gets thrown under the bus and long-term Elon gets to protect his reputation. But this is going to cost him in the short term. It cost him share price. It cost him relationships with banks. And it will cost him, basically, he is doing the Make America Great Again. And if he does end up creating a political party, that is the party that will usher in a monetary reform and actually make that change. So in this particular occasion, I know Elon's background, but this is where I personally, and I'd like to see your vote in the poll on YouTube, I'm on Team Elon for this occasion. I don't do cults. I don't say I love Trump and therefore whenever he does something good or bad, I just join the cult. We just talk about policies. And that's why, these are the cults that drive people into defending the indefensible and ending up defending things like Epstein lists and various other constituencies and various other things. And so we shall watch this space. But I think it perfectly highlights the content that I've always been covered in the macro section and how the proof of weapons network works and how the debt-based Ponzi scheme works. And now we're getting a power structure within America where Trump is rolling over the debt-based Ponzi scheme for the banks, and Elon is going against the banks by looking at a monetary reform rather than ushering in business as usual by having real stuff that would actually redistribute wealth away from Wall Street and over to Main Street if it actually happened. And so that's what Elon's doing. And so I'm on Team Elon for this one, but I think Team Trump will win. But I think it will work for Team Elon in the future and his reputation, even though it will cost him short term. And that's how sometimes you can do stuff, because sometimes doing what's right is the right thing to do, even when it costs you money short term. And this is the problem with the construct of the corporations that control America. It's all designed around short term thinking. And now anything long-term that benefits the state is not factored into the design and the game theory. That's why I follow the money. And that's why you don't get any actions that help the people. And that's why I need you to be prepared and go back to part 1 if you didn't watch it, and make sure that you're protecting yourself in this world of Bitcoin AI and CBDCs, and you're boycotting the Fed with Bitcoin and owning Bitcoin in self-custody to boycott BlackRock so that you own sovereign wealth. And you can protect yourself in this transition. Right, so we're going to move into part 3 now. In part 3, I'm going to be doing This Week in Geopolitics. It will build off everything we covered in part 1 and part 2. But do me a favor. I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. We are almost there. We have been unshadow banned and we've got a lot more subscribers. So please, if you're watching this and you're not subscribed, head over to YouTube, hit the bell symbol, hit all. And while you're there, vote on the poll. And let us know, are you on team, who's doing the right thing? Are you on Team Trump or Team Elon on this occasion? Put a comment there as well. Let me know your thoughts as well and your theory around what's happening. I think this is fluid and we will analyze it as we progress, but this is my speculation. And if you are not on Rumble, head over there and follow me there in case YouTube shuts me down, because once we get to 100,000, they'll do a review on my channel. And in case Rumble shuts me down, head over to simondixon.com. Make sure you got to log into the BitcoinHardTalk free membership portal. And we give you additional stuff over there that you can't get anywhere else by having a login. And then you're on my newsletter. And I'll update you every single week and make sure you're up to date. Follow me on X. I'm going to take some water and then we're going to jump right into part 3 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 84. Elon, Trump, Epstein, what's real? What is real? Put in the comment below. Okay, welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 84. This is part 3 this week in geopolitics. And there have been lots of updates on the different conflicts that are happening around the world. I always analyze in the context of following the money, the macro side, and help people understand what I think comes next. And I think you'll agree, if you're a long-term listener, that I tend to go counter-narrative sometime. Most people believe that Israel is in control. They're going to draw US into a war with Iran, and that the genocide is going to complete. The genocide is awful. The humanitarian crisis is awful. I change my voice because when I go into seeing what's happening there, it's different from what I believe is going to come next in terms of the geopolitical analysis side. It's got nothing to do with what I want to happen, because nothing that I want to happen will happen. It's the people that have real power structure, that are in the game, that are going to decide what happens. And my job is to report to you what the media is not telling you and the bullshit that the politicians are telling you, so you can get ahead of it and understand what I believe is happening next. And if I get it wrong, I'll tell you. But at the moment, I think I'm dead right with what I've been saying. As a little recap, the military-industrial complex, the faction of the Proof of Weapons Network, headed up by BlackRock and its portfolio companies like General Dynamic, Raytheon, Boeing, and various other ones, and even Palantir in the technical side. It is reallocating budgets according to their financial statements. It is shifting them away from a focus on the Middle East, and it is going towards Europe instead, where there's more money to be made, and Asia Pacific region, where there is more money to be made by ratcheting up narratives. So I'll go through the narratives that happened this week that really are completely in line with what I predicted in previous episodes. Because the reason that is happening is because the financial investments and strategic partnerships and now dominate the Middle East, that make a lot more money if there is normalization in the region and the ability to use nuclear energy and invest in AI data centers and cryptocurrency exchanges and stable coins and energy utilization. There is a lot more money for the old neocons, which are trying to make all of the money left over from Biden, and then they've got Trump more aligned with the banks. So Trump is investing all his money there, and the banks and financial institutions are doing deals with sovereign countries like Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia. They normalized with Iran because of China's plan of normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That led to, I believe, what happened with the weakening of the Axis, the overthrow and regime change within Syria, and the eventual regime change within Israel, so that the GCC and the financial institutions can acquire Israel in distress and turn it eventually into what may be a two-state solution, but eventually a one-state solution. So all of the aggression that is escalating right now is going to only weaken Israel in terms of its strategic acquisitions. It's no longer the primary target for large-scale forever wars. That neocon model is about to end. And it's just about doing deals with the Gulf Cooperation Council, which has the sovereign wealth and has the sovereign access to energy as well. And basically, the weapons deal is selling the BlackRock, weapons from the BlackRock portfolio companies, not based upon strategic tension between Iran and Israel, and narrative control that makes it look like Muslims are trying to kill Jews, and funding groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which is still happening, by the way, right now from the West through USAID. Still got some of those operations that are happening right now. With the last bit of money that's left over with those strategic opportunities, but instead they're giving those weapons to police the regions, and artificial intelligence contracts with Palantir to police the regions, with them able to host the data in its own AI data centers with its own energy and nuclear energy. And so Trump was there to usher in all of those deals that takes away the colonial power that America historically has had in the Middle East, and usher in a wave of decolonization as well. And so we're getting more and more withdrawals, which is what I was predicting based upon the current situation. and and all of that we're seeing as well, that I think is the vision for that. And also Bitcoin mining, I think that's strategically being involved. And Bitcoin sovereign reserves, I believe, are being built up right now through Bitcoin mining and just not being publicly disclosed as well. So this is essentially a US, through strategic investment, pragmatic shrinking of America into a regional power, getting rid of the covert operations, which was the main purpose of Israel, which was a Middle Eastern instability campaign to serve US corporations and the neocon model of funding wars. Now this is a stability campaign instead. And we're moving away from those open-ended wars that were the previous 100 years under the British Empire and the American Empire. Essentially, the China plan of normalization with Iran and Saudi Arabia, but the weapons are used in order to stabilize rather than destabilize. And this also serves America's target of hitting their... You get the big, beautiful bill. You print a bunch of money printing, which is theft from American people. You hand it over to these corporate contracts, and you get to pretend your GDP is higher based upon fake growth. And you get to fund a stimulation through war that then allows you to sell more bonds and go through everything that we've covered in the macro section in part 2. So what's the actual strategy? It's essentially create new threats, create new opportunities in the final phases, use up the weapons, use up the money, and then you can move over to the regions that you're going to make up for the profits that are not covered in the Middle East. And so you need to push strings like the Putin is Hitler narrative, and Putin's about to take over to Europe. That allows the European Union to get the European Central Bank to print more money, and then that money printing can be strategically moved away from the European people over to the proxy governments that are being installed across the European Union that are setting up or potentially having their Bitcoin strategic reserves, but are manufacturing narratives around far-right invasions and various other things in order to justify why they're going to spend up to 5% on NATO to send those all of that military budget over to America. And so that's escalating tensions within Asia Pacific as well. And so that's so you can make up for the lost money from the military companies, and you can make up for it by selling weapons to Japan, selling weapons to Philippines, selling weapons to Taiwan, and you just need to ratchet up some narrative pretending that China is about to invade Taiwan and take over those chips. Basically, when you think about it, when you're following the money, this is just basically portfolio management. That's how I've always thought it. And people think that that's not why wars happen. They think they're organic. None of them are organic, especially when you read the operation, like through Operation Gladio, the book Operation Gladio. I recommend to everybody by Paul Williams to understand how these different groups and militias were set up, and how they're utilized by intelligence agencies to protect corporate interests, create civil unrest and violence campaign. It's just about propping up fake GDP, having the growth, and protecting corporate interests at the expense of the American people, as I covered in the macro section. This isn't US acting like an empire anymore. It's acting like a corporate sales rep. And that's what I think is happening right now. And the controllers of the empire is the Proof of Weapons Network. And I call BlackRock the current CEO. Power structures change, but they've got the most assets under administration and the best technology that is used by Treasury, and also for monetary policy and central bank, both fiscal and monetary policy in case of America. And all of the different asset managers are using their technology, which is why they have the power play at the moment. They have BlackRock has substantial stakes across all of the defense, technology, consumer, and money, as I covered in part 2, just recapping it as well. and they're able to utilize Western governments like the US, the EU, and the UK as proxies. You know how you always say Hezbollah is an Iran-backed proxy. Well, the US is a proof of weapons back proxy. Trump is a sales rep for this proxy force of the proof of weapon network. And then they're able to get strategic tension in order to maximize their portfolio. And basically, policy just becomes product placement. It becomes theft. It becomes narrative control. Essentially, just becomes a marketing strategy for war and selling weapons. And national interests are basically secondary. And so if it serves national interest to rebuild a bridge for the portfolio, then you'll only get it if they can do that. But if there's no loss making, you won't get your bridge. You won't get your infrastructure. For them, it's just about countries are just nodes on the proof of weapon network, just like Bitcoin proof of work has nodes that have backup of all transactions to provide security. This is securing the profits of the proof of weapons network based upon creating as many debt-based fiat Ponzi schemes so that countries work for the proof of weapons network. And it's all about maximizing portfolios and profits without any type of humanitarian consideration. That's why I follow the money in determining this. And I know narrative is always the opposite of what it said. So what did we see this week in geopolitics? Let's go through some of the events. Firstly, we had the complete removal of the USS Harry Truman, which returned home after a failed war with Yemen. Remember I said you can only win if you have a ground invasion, and a ground invasion means a full proxy. So just doing these were just blowing up bombs, humanitarian crisis in a war you can't win for the profits of the military industrial complex. Exactly how it played out. Trump made some money by killing, and using bombs, and he made it for his bosses. We also had in Syria, basically Syria, which is vassalized by Turkey and the GCC. American interests are retreating, which is represented by sanctions. You had the sanction removal, which means that the Syrian proxy government for Turkey and GCC can be used to gain access to wheat and oil, which is their industry, which stops the starvation campaigns, which historically had. And you don't get the funding of US and Israeli proxies like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which is a militias that we used to create the civil war. And then you had Hezbollah resistance groups that came in to fight ISIS within Syria during the civil war. And then that was used in order to create narratives of Shia versus Sunni, to create divide and conquer narratives. And because the Assad regime was also, a military dictator that would take out any of these forces. So when ISIS is coming in, you could say he's killing Sunnis. And then you could use that to ratchet up the Shia Sunni divide and conquer. You could confuse people with this mess. And then when you have different militia groups funded by America coming in, you basically have CIA funding it or Mossad funding it. It's all about divide and conquer. And then you have Assad that would put these people in torture camps. And then you have, civil unrest. And then you have rebel groups that want to overthrow the government, all because of these sanctions. And the old tricks that have been used, all of them were used on Syria. Now you're not seeing any of those false flags, from that side. But Israel, which is essentially a pariah state right now, Netanyahu looking after his own career when he was a representative for military prior, I think he's trying to create strategic escalation. So you saw the government that is effectively normalized with Israel already, normalized with the GCC, normalized with Iran, by allowing the rebels to come in and the Turkey and all the forces that have happened right now. There was a claim that Syria is firing rockets at Israel because Israel is trying to gain more land here in its negotiations so that it can negotiate its exit with the GCC. And it was saying that the Syrian government was firing rockets at Israel. Makes zero sense whatsoever. This would be Israel occupying land and firing rockets at itself in order to gain some more negotiation power, explore opportunities to make a little bit more profit for the military industrial complex while they eventually exit as well. I believe Syria is on board with the GCC plan. They make him as an interim leader. He used to work with ISIS, so I think it was Saudi Arabia's pick of a temporary leader in order to manage this strategic weakening of Israel so that it can be acquired in distress as we move from a two-state solution under Abraham Accords 2 that eventually will be through acquisition and strategic weakening, a one-state solution. And if you take out all of the British Empire and American Empire and military-industrial complex violence funding, you can just have Jews, Muslims, and Christians returning to peace how they lived before. They always welcome Jews. Remember, Palestinians, if you go back through the generations, they were originally Jews. Some of them converted to Christians, and then later some of them converted to Islam. But the blood heritage that the military-industrial complex creates this narrative trying to say Jews are trying to, the Muslims are trying to kill Jews and they're trying to provide a safe place for Jews. This is all narratives that's weaponized for profits. And it's all just campaigns to trick you and then use biblical quotes of prophets, confuse the word Israel, the prophet Israel or Yaqub, and confuse it with the land Israel that was deliberately done through the Zionist mission when it constructed deals with the Rothschild family and the British Empire and all the history we know, all the Hezbollah. I put out a tweet with a speech that covered the Hezbollah and lies and various other things. I don't want to go through all the history. I have given you an overview, covered it very much, but it's absolutely a psyop if you don't understand, to make you think that this is something else, and it is. But Syria is already on board with that plan as well. There's no reason why people, when you take out the unnatural side, can't just return to how they were, because Palestinians always welcomed Jewish immigrants. They just didn't welcome rapage, pillaging, stealing, colonization for the British Empire, weaponizing the Jewish faith, and engaging in false flag operations to put more immigrants to be an awful place for the Jewish people to live. They've always lived in violence. And then you have to engage in ethnic cleansing. And then you have to engage in dehumanizing operations, because you have to work for the IDF. It was the worst thing that could ever happen. Put them in the most unsafest environment. And basically you were just tools for the military industrial complex. And the $7 trillion of money printing that was used by creating all those wars that were unnatural and never need to be created. Anyway, the proof of weapons network is scraping for the final profits for the military industrial complex. I personally still believe before the GCC and the financial companies and the deals take over. And in order to start some of those deals, they had aid contracts. And so America and Israel started to swap out some of these aid contracts. And you're starting to see this. I'm just going to turn the lighting down a little bit. Now that it's got a little bit lighter, darker rather. So what have we seen this week? Well, we have had approximately 5 days of taking all the Palestinians, congregating them down the south of Gaza, making them queue up for aid after this 3-month starvation campaign, which is the most disgusting Holocaust you have seen in modern history. This is a modern day Holocaust. And this is being funded by the West. They're being used as negotiation chips in this negotiation while the GCC tries to decolonize. The final deals are being done between America and Iran. Once that deal is announced, you'll get different types of profit activities like real aid. And some of the aid that got through was had a expiry date from last year, because Israel stopped it all getting as deliberately weaponizing starvation, famine, lack of water in order to commit this genocide. But we've had 5 days of very, very tiny aid delivery, just like the campaign. Do you remember the flour massacre? They let one bit of aid in, They would have Palestinians surrounding, and then they would start shooting them down. We've had the same thing. Hundreds of Palestinians massacred and killed. And this is by the US and Israel joint operation. WikiLeaks released the details of this company. It was a Swiss company funded by US and Israel money, just like the new networks that they set up, like USAID, whatever it was called. WikiLeaks revealed all of those different follow the money. What are they doing now? They're taking CIA funded and Mossad funded ISIS, and they're saying these people are basically taking the aid, and they're telling people that Hamas is taking the aid. And then we got an actual admission, because the cabinet within Israel is in disaster right now because they're absolutely losing this. They're in absolute economic turmoil, civil unrest, because everyone knows that Netanyahu doesn't want to return the hostages. The Zionist faction are putting out genocidal rhetoric. They're funding settlers in order to steal land, take land. They've had more IDF soldiers taken as prisoners of war that they'll call civilians hostages in their narrative. And the defense minister of Israel just came out and point blank admitted on TV that they are arming these ISIS groups in order to take the aid. And so they're not even good at this stuff anymore. It's only the cover up of Western media, and you have to be plugged in and following this and following the money, that they've revealed that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are Western proxies, and they're now weaponizing them in order to steal the land as the aid as they pretend to come through, and they engage in massacre campaigns. And so what happened while this was all happening? Well, a ceasefire was agreed this week, at the early part of this week and last week. Israel agreed to it, allegedly. The US agreed to it. Hamas agreed to it. And the interesting part is what was in the ceasefire agreement. It was what Hamas said all along, right from the agreement that they wanted to do on the third day, which is it said that Hamas would put new leadership in. They wouldn't be a part of the proposal. It would be a transition to a technocrat, they wouldn't be a part of it. And that's the problem. Israel needs Hamas to be a part of it, because Israel needs an excuse to continue the war under the old neocon model. Now, everyone else is on board with the new model. US, GCC, Iran, China. I personally believe, from following the money, everybody's ready for that. But we just got Israel that is still working in the old model. Hamas admitted it and said that in this plan, they would relinquish control. It was part of the signed agreement. The governance and management of Gaza would be completely independent. It would be technical. It would be a technical committee of Palestinians. And they didn't want that. So Israel didn't allow this to happen. And instead, we get Witkoff covering up. We had the United Nations voting against ceasefire, despite the fact that everyone had agreed to this. You got nothing in the media mentioning what's happening unless you were following this as well. So I still believe that the regime change within Israel is going to happen. I still believe it's only going to happen once there is a nuclear deal announced. And despite all of the posturing, I think there will be a nuclear deal, even though people are saying that Iran has turned it down and America is saying, you've got to do this and we won't budge. All posturing from my perspective by following the money. We had a couple of other announcements as a result of these massacres, the continuation of settlers expanding in the West Bank. Saudi Arabia foreign minister, basically the Prince Faisal bin Farhan, he was expected to actually visit the West Bank. This is one of the most senior Saudi officials. And this is the first visit since 1967, the 6-Day War. And so this is Saudi, really looking at what they're going to be acquiring once all of these the settlements, are handed over from Israel over to the control of the GCC, and genuine peace rather than destabilization campaigns. is put through. Now, remember the Saudi investment fund. Some of that funding is Trump money via Kushner Affinity Partners. That is Saudi funded, and that is why Trump is on board. It's not because he cares about peace. He wants to get his Nobel Peace Prize through Abraham Accords too. It was China that did it, and they had to allow Trump to get into different deals. And that's why the tariff policy happened, which would strategically weaken America into a regional power, realign with the GCC that were aligned with BRICS, and we'd have this multipolar world order, which BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network, using US and Trump as a proxy, has aligned their investment with, and Trump gets to get rich out of it as well. I think they're aligned. I think this is seizing up and negotiating really what eventually will be a one-state solution rather than a two-state solution. And we'll see. Anyway, that's more speculative part. But Israel refused entry because they know that they don't want the GCC in. So Israel refused, went back on the peace plan and the ceasefire, refused entry from the Saudi. So they are still resisting. And that's why I believe we're going to get regime change, because Israel isn't playing ball with what BlackRock wants. And so I think the military are trying to get their last bit of profits. And then it moves over to the financial complex, will probably lead to a destabilization campaign within Israel. We had, as I said, Iran's supreme leader Khamenei. He was calling out America following basically nuclear talks, basically saying hard line, because I think, Iran knows that there is a much more compelling vision based upon normalization. It requires pleasing the different factions. But I think this is going to be good for Iran and its people. Obviously, they have different proof of weapons networks that have been set, because when you have sanctions, you tend to have these criminal networks that are set up. Sanctions makes the government more and more corrupt. You try and create colored revolutions to push narratives that lead to the people struggling, overthrowing the government. So Iran is very divided in terms of how it thinks and its different ideologies. But if you can get it out of sanctions, that's what America has in their card. But at the same time, monetizing all these investments means you have to work with the GCC. Iran is strategically weakened, but at the same time holds a lot of the cards in this negotiation. So as soon as that nuclear deal is announced, it can make Trump have to do a bit of a taco. It gets this enrichment, would be my forecast. So Iran has power and strategic power there. But the Israel and the US part are kind of weaponizing the genocide and the last profits of military in order to negotiate this. And that's why I think it's taking longer than it should. But anyway, I think this is Iran saying what Iran needs to say. I don't take it literally, but it was a signal that nuclear uranium enrichment has to be part of the deal. And personally, I believe that Iran wants that additional posturing to show that to their people that they got that taco, and this will be used for energy. And when America arms the GCC, you can have balance in the region that would make ushering in peace and investment and all the benefits that can come from that in this new, area. And so, Khomeini was coming out and saying, this is basically none of your business. And we had US veto voting the UN Security Council resolution, which was calling for a Gaza ceasefire. And unanimously, everybody around the world is looking for plausible deniability, doesn't want anything to do with this genocide. But America is the last one using its veto power to veto vote against peace, as it has all along, while pretending it's negotiating peace, because it's just a faction of the military-industrial complex. That is entirely expected, but it's still enraging, knowing that all the massacres are happening, the starvation is happening, the famine is happening, the worst Holocaust. This is a Gaza modern-day Holocaust. and it won't be resolved by the United Nations. It will only be resolved via deals, negotiations, and the China peace plan that is very advanced and very far along, and decolonization by the US and alignment of financial interests in order to do that. So anyone that still thinks that the UN is where like the Palestinian cause is going to come from, that's not the power structure. That's the symbolic side once the deal is actually done. As I said, I think it only gets resolved once we get the Iran deal, and I believe the Iran deal will come. And if it doesn't come, then you know I've got this one wrong. But I'm pretty sure we're on that path. They'll be pushing back on the US proposal anyway, and the enrichment is the key thing. There may be port negotiations, other strategic routes, depend how it's all happening, with the bit that we'll never be able to do. But Iran will continue to play hardball. Trump will continue to play hardball until we get the taco trade. Okay, what else have we got in this week in geopolitics side? Right, so remember what I said. There's the two other ways that you can make up for the profit that's leaving here. And so we got the narrative that is needed to make up for that profit. So this week we had Peter Hegseth. He says that Beijing's credibility, they are credibly, preparing to use force to alter the balance of power in the region. So he's basically saying China's about to invade Taiwan. That is allowing for the narrative that's needed to put in the big bill or accept to American people why you should be sending loads of money because the whole world's about to end and China's about to invade Taiwan, which messes up the chips, creates trillions of dollars. They're not going to do that. They're absolutely not going to do that. It would create a global recession, risk World War III. It would destroy everything and all the advantage and everything that's in China's self-interest right now. Also, US started to accuse China of withholding key goods for the tariff war. So if during this tariff war, China withholds goods, then that's acceptable to the American people, why you'd want to send billions over and make up for the profits for the military-industrial complex. We had Hegseth say that we need to basically, you know, the whole narratives that we had there in terms of realigning the balance of power, traumatizing the American people into thinking that this is about to happen. And so that's all happening on the Asia Pacific profits for the military industrial complex. And then the other one is the $1 trillion of profits you can make up for by not allowing peace to happen between Russia and Ukraine. And so in order to ratchet up that narrative, what did we get this week? Well, Russia and Ukraine, they began peace talk negotiations in Istanbul, Turkey. And Russia said that there won't be any ceasefire. That was the conditions. They're only interested in lasting solutions to peace, which means CIA, MI6, NATO, retreat, demonstrate how you're not going to do that. That requires the full vassalization of Ukraine. Zelensky was the implant working for BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network and the military industrial complex to destroy Ukraine, kill their own people, constrict them, and you end up with the full vassalization between whatever deal is being negotiated between BRICS and BlackRock as a US proxy of the military industrial complex and Europe as NATO, which is all of the different narratives that are being done. And so what needs to happen if there is going to be peace talks? They cannot lead to a result right now. There's another $1 trillion to print. And so right up during the peace talks and leading to the peace talks, there was new drone attacks on Russia, within Russia. These were very prominent attacks. This was using technology as well. You know, I believe that whatever happens, Ukraine is going to be complete vassalization by Russia and BRICS and whatever favorable terms the Proof of Weapons Network gets. because it collateralized all through the financial industrial side, all of the land. But I wouldn't be surprised if Ukraine at this stage almost gets entirely absorbed into Russia and the BlackRock future and whatever is happening at this stage, and there'll be nothing left for that. Because there's another $1 trillion they can make, and Europe is pushing up the narrative. Trump did the humiliation ritual that we covered, where Zelensky was trying to push a narrative that America is not interested in war. Trump gets to move towards his Nobel Peace Prize, but the negotiations happen with Europe taking on the budgets. And so the attacks on Ukraine, on Russia, they basically say, it's no different to basically what's happening with Israel right now on Gaza. These are both military-industrial complex proxies to strengthen the negotiations. Trump is the proxy saying that he wants to create peace, but the Proof of Weapons Network is the beneficiary in tandem with BRICS, because they're doing the deals that have been negotiated within the Middle East as well. So we had these renewed attacks. This is essentially a sign that there is strong Ukrainian resistance as well against the Proof of Weapons Network. So maybe this is Ukraine trying to preserve some of its land against the Russia faction of BRICS and the BlackRock faction of the US proxy and NATO. And so maybe this happened without them, or maybe this happened with them. That's the speculation. I'm not sure whether US knew about it. There was lots of narrative around US knowing about it. And maybe this is Ukraine actually trying to get some more of its own land back and using some of the weapons that it got from Europe, so that you can have a little mix of European rare earth deals with US rare earth deals, with Ukraine solving some of its sovereignty, a puppet government that will probably serve either Russia or BlackRock interest. But could be some resistance back against that as well. Russia said they will retaliate. We've seen what Russia does. When it retaliates, it brings out some next level weapon. They've already done that in the past. It doesn't bring out nukes. You don't need to worry about nukes. This isn't a suicide mission. This is just about everyone trying to get their negotiation powers and maximizing profits as well. I personally believe that Trump didn't expect this one, but maybe I could be ignorant there. But I don't think Trump expected this one. I think he would, it wasn't meant to give more power to the Ukraine side, or it could be a proxy of the military-industrial complex. But I'm starting to think that this wasn't part of the plan. I don't think Putin expected this one as well. It did make Russia look weak. It gave a new narrative. It gave it a ratcheting up a narrative. There were follow-up operations where it took out a bridge, took out infrastructure, could have led to some civilian targets as well as just military targets. But I don't believe there's going to be any meaningful peace progress because there's too much money to be made. And I think that's all part of the negotiations on the global landscape and the multipolar world order. Until the military, has basically squeezed out another $1 trillion, I think that they're maximizing there at the expense of the European people. And until BlackRock gets approximately 60% vassalization, or Russia gets more and more and more, that is the only time when we're going to find out. So this could be years from now. We could get more and more years. I'm not sure if it's going to happen during the Trump administration. Maybe it will happen towards the end of the term. But I think there will only be peace, when more money has been taken out of it. So what did we get? What's the narrative? UK, EU, US, they aren't after peace right now. They're after fake GDP. So America needs more fake GDP to sell more bonds, to back it by stable coins, to buy more Bitcoin, as we manage this, what I covered in the macro section as well. The Europeans, they need a bit of, strategic recession weakness. So more of that money will go out to the US military industrial complex, but maybe, You have these more of it, some of it going to Germany. But the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, was ratcheting up the narrative to scare the shit out of the British people, to justify why everything is so bad in the UK, and yet they got billions of dollars to send over to Ukraine. Same within Germany. Everything is so bad within Germany, but they got billions of dollars to send over to US contractors in Ukraine as well, or via Ukraine is a more appropriate way of saying it. And so UK actually started to say, we are moving the country into war fighting readiness. We believe that Russia is on the verge of invading UK, and we need to be war ready. We need to be ready to, I mean, come on, the UK army fighting. This is like the IDF, trying to fight back against Hezbollah on the ground. There's no war readiness involved here. It's only going to be weapons sold for military profits. It's only going to be fake GDP, as we covered in the macro section. But Ukraine went and met with striking a bridge in Russia, in Crimea, and some of the underwater explosives that were happening. We had announcements from China that they've created artificial intelligence technology that can detect underwater submarines, which changes the game as well. And then we had, then this was used in order to really ratchet up the narrative that the UK is about to be invaded by Russia. Right. I wanted to cover one more part. Last week, and I released a video on manufacturing civil unrest. I just wanted to give some updates on what's happening in the manufacturing civil unrest campaigns within the West. So you've got peace within the Middle East. You've got a strategic retreat around BRICS. You've got more violence within Europe. You've got the threat of violence within the Asia-Pacific region, but no war there. And you've got the destabilization campaign within the US, EU, and UK. So please do watch that I published on my YouTube channel around manufacturing the civil unrest and manufacturing the destabilization campaigns. I want to make sure you understand that, but we ratcheted up some of the hate crimes, all of the narratives that are needed for divide and conquer. Within America, we had basically an incident that led to accusations of anti-Semitism, accusations of extreme terrorism that was happening within America. You had all of the influencers pushing out the narrative, leading to more deportations, leading to removal of constitution, leading to making people that say the word free Palestine, making it sound like they're terrorists, all of the gaslighting that's needed to drive all of the things that I talked about in that video. Please watch that video if you hadn't watched it. And so this is, let me make sure I get the name right. There were basically 14 bomb cocktails that were found near, basically a scene where somebody saying free Palestine was throwing them at a pro-Israeli protest within America. So they were throwing these basically, bombs, these petrol bombs, whatever they were. And they were saying that this is all about anti-Semitism. They were saying that he was shouting free Palestine, and they were saying that this is a terrorist attack. Look, to me, I don't know the exact information. I don't know whether I can prove it at this stage, but I do know a false flag when I see it, and this was very suspicious. Those that published out, there was some publish around the vehicle that this quote-unquote terrorist came from, and within the car and the vehicle, there was some USAID paperwork. And the USAID paperwork was discovered in the vehicle. This is the connection to basically strongly suggest that this is CIA or Mossad operation. Maybe they're doing this just to keep the paperwork there and manufacture on violence. I'm not sure of the exact strategies, but these are all clearly intelligence network strategies to manufacture civil unrest. It means that it is funded by the deep state and these USAID NGO networks. And these are the same groups that were funding the ISIS, that were stealing the aid campaigns as they were profiting from making the aid campaigns. This is regional instability being used within Europe, within America, within UK, the same tactics that they would have historically used through the National Endowment of Democracy and USAID in the Middle East and Asia and Latin America. The same tactics are being used against their own people, further implying that this is a stateless entity in charge, and this is no longer governments working in the interest of its own people. And so I think this is evidence that what I said holds true. This is part of calculated strategy, destabilization. I think this is deliberate. I don't think these are natural. The end result is that you get civil unrest. And when you get civil unrest, you can basically deepen any of the surveillance state that is needed. And so what is a big part of the big, beautiful bill that I covered in the macro section? Palantir surveillance. So Palantir has created all the AI, all of the occupation as a service, all of the genocide as a service, all of the manufactured civil unrest AI algorithms. And this is, I believe, a manufactured way of making sure that you're okay with the big, beautiful bill. And more violence leads to that. Whether these operations fail or succeed, you know what the intent is. Law changes, they only follow fear. And fear, just like Patriot Act, requires violent campaigns so that people can manufacture consent for that. And that's what the video was all about. So I just want to make sure you recognize these patterns. All of these patterns were happening this week in the geopolitical side. They're still using these in order to justify the Gaza genocide. They now want to be able to use, if someone says free Palestine, that it is not just a slogan, that it is actually a demand, it is terrorism. And so if you stand for free Palestine, which to me is standing for life, liberty, freedom, and property rights, the same things that you call Western values, the same thing that you would expect for your own home. If someone tried to steal your home and tried to take your family as possessions and lead to them controlling 90% of your home and used violence, you would hope that the law would protect you. You would hope that your life is protected. You would hope that you would have the liberty to be able to defend yourself and use your Second Amendment and use your freedom of speech and First Amendment. And you would hope that your property would be protected. It wouldn't just be able to be taken over. And yet you claim to stand for those things. And many people just don't expect that to happen for the Palestinians when the British Empire comes and invades, when US funded, and Israeli funded proxies and military funded settlements are funded. And that's why I think this is coming over to you. Don't think that this technology and everything that Palantir stands for is not going to be used for you. The surveillance state and the command and control systems that were beta tested in Gaza, why don't you think they can be used for you? If you believe that this is okay, and if you accept the narratives, and if you believe and you're willing to stand against that, Palantir was originally backed by the CIA VC firm as well. And so why wouldn't it be used against you? The CIA has done operations against you all the time, And so this is why I believe that this is a humanity fight. This is us fighting for life, liberty, and freedom, property rights. And if you don't apply it to Gaza, what makes you think that they won't use it on you? And if that happened to you, don't you think you deserve the right to resist? And don't you think international law allows for people to resist against occupation as well? These things exist. And what do they do in order to prevent you from resisting against your occupier, resisting against somebody trying to take away life, liberty, freedom, and property rights? What do? They call you a terrorist. Because then when they classify you as a terrorist, by changing laws, no due process exists. They can make you end up in Guantanamo Bay with no right to a lawyer. They can deport you to El Salvador, where you won't be able to see your family again, and you will be classified as, an M13 terrorist as well. They will use the very same techniques against you, and they will use it in order to change the law so that a big, beautiful bill can come in, so that Palantir can have the technology that it needs, so that when this civil unrest happens, they can guarantee that you will consent to it, just like you did last time when they used 9/11 to radicalize you into accepting the Patriot Act and making profits for the forever wars for the sake of the military industrial complex, so you can be a useful idiot for them. I watched this happen in UK. I've watched this happen in EU, and I'm watching this happen in America right now. You may think the Palestinian struggle is not your fight, but it is. It is a fight for the very same things, because the very same techniques are being used against you right now. And do you stand for peaceful resistance? Will you join the fight for life, liberty, freedom? Will you allow for Palestinian dignity and the things you expect for yourself to also be applied to them? I think that your grandchildren will be watching these videos. There is a Gazan Holocaust that is happening right now. It is sponsored by our systems. And I think our grandchildren will be watching. What did you do during that time? And I think that it will be remembered, because this was documented. They can't rewrite history on this one. This is the modern day Holocaust. This is happening right now. It is death and destruction. I believe it comes to an end, but were you silent and complicit during this whole thing? And that's a question you have to ask yourself. We've only got each other. That's all we got. Our governments don't work for us. Follow the money, you'll know that is the case. So are you going to stay in silence? Are you going to stand for life, liberty, freedom, and property rights? Are you only going to care about it when it happens to you? I personally believe it's a test spiritually, and I believe we're in a spiritual war as well. And so whatever floats your boat to motivate you to understand what is happening right now, I will continue to cover. I will continue to follow the money. I will continue to give you everything that I've got to recognize this, but you need to decide what you're doing. We are ushering in a world of Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies. Remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. If you don't usher in the change that is needed, you don't adjust to this, unfortunately, you're going to be on the wrong side of history, and you're going to be remembered as somebody that allowed this Holocaust to exist and allowed the law changes to happen because you allowed them to call you a terrorist for resisting against life, liberty, freedom, and property rights. The same techniques are being used on you because you allowed it to happen to them. Alternatively, we could pull together. We could recognize that the resistance is needed. We could do it peacefully. We could own Bitcoin. We could boycott the Federal Reserve System. We could own it in self-custody, boycott BlackRock. We could have more consciousness with our money by spending local and supporting our communities rather than propping up the machine so that the profits are affected. And there is a bonus. Over time, if you save in Bitcoin, historically, you have beaten all asset classes. You have become more economically powerful. And when you are economically powerful, you get to influence the lobby because the government listens to your money. It doesn't listen to what your vote is worthless, but your money and lobby money is implemented. That's how we afford change. That's how we affect change. And that's how we do it long term. And that's how we do it with peace, love, and unity, rather than having to go down this violent path that they want to take us down. So that's going to do it for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 84. Epstein, Trump, Elon, what's real? I covered that in This Week in Bitcoin, This Week in Macro, and This Week in Geopolitics. And so please do subscribe to my YouTube channel if you've enjoyed this. Hit the bell symbol, hit like, hit participate in the poll that's happening right now. Are you on Team Elon or are you on Team Trump right now? Doesn't mean you're there for life, We don't do cults here. We just do reality based upon the situation that we are faced with right now. In case YouTube, we get over to 100,000 subscribers, they will review my channel. Please help me get there. And in case something bad happens, please follow me on Rumble, where I'll carry on. And you can go to the backup on simondixon.com, join the free Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, where you can get a free login and all the resources you need to transition to this world of AI, Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. Peace.